Dear friends, welcome to Valley Presbyterian Church tonight. Thank you for coming for this special evening. We are on Sundays doing a series where we're trying to connect our faith with our vocations, the job that God calls us to do in the world. And so last Sunday we talked a little bit about healthcare, about Jesus' comprehensive sense of what it meant to be whole in body and mind and heart and spirit, in relationships with one another, emotionally and psychologically as well as spiritually. And so we have a distinguished panel here tonight that in different ways are part of that healing ministry of God that continues to this day in the world. And so we're going to ask them some questions. We're going to have some time for you to ask them questions. And we're glad that there's other folks who are joining us by live stream. So easy question to start. They will get harder, just so you know, is just tell us. I wonder if we'll start with Erica. We'll start at the far end. Just introduce yourself and tell us how you're involved in this healing work that God does in the world.
So my name is Erica Driver-Dunkley, and I am a neurologist at Mayo Clinic. So I do teaching of residents and medical students. I see patients. I do research. That's my job.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. David.
I'm David Gullen. I'm a retired general internist. I was a primary care internist with my own patients for about 35 years, and then since retiring, I did some executive physicals at Mayo, and then I've been teaching at the medical school at Mayo since it began in 2017, still teach there. I have a special interest in patient-physician communications and also in helping other doctors teach, so very interested in that, still active.
Thank you. Lamont.
Awesome. Good evening. I'm Lamont Yoder. I am a reformed nurse who has gone on to leadership roles. So I started as a nursing assistant and a nurse and worked in open heart ICU for a decade, then went into leadership and kept progressing. Today I'm the division president for Banner Health for Arizona, the state of Arizona, and responsible for the 14 hospitals in the state for Banner Health, and building 2 more, so I'll have 16 next year. So my role has progressed over the years from the bedside to the boardroom, and from being able to help in patient care to being able to support the best that we can with the challenges that we have in front of us around patient care. So glad to be here tonight.
Thank you, Lamont. Shelley.
Hi, I'm Shelley Reed. I'm a clinical psychologist. I own a group practice in Mesa where I work with individuals and couples doing therapy from trauma to anxiety, bipolar disorder, addiction, the whole across the board there. And I have a few other therapists that work with me, and I have the pleasure of supervising them. I love mentoring and supervising as part of my role. And my husband's a pastor and a church planter, and so part of the role, part of what I do at the church is to do psych evaluations for people in our church who are hoping to plant churches or become missionaries. Part of the screening and sending process with them.
Mm-hmm. And you've come and taught here and equipped our congregation too as well.
Yes, I love your people.
Thank you. Tony.
Well, good evening, everybody. I think I know a lot of you. I'm Tony Will. I'm a board-certified family physician. I was with Midwestern University for about 20 years. I was department chairman of osteopathic medicine, and I've taught residents and medical students for a long time. I'm currently teaching at the University of Arizona College of Medicine in Phoenix, and I have a practice in Glendale, right near Thunderbird Hospital, and I've had the same patients, same practice, heavily geriatric, for about 20 years. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you all again for coming tonight. I wonder, as you think about how you came to be involved in this healing ministry that's going on in the world, when did you know you had a sense of call? How did your sense of call develop? What were the signs that God was drawing you towards the work that you're doing? And I won't point my finger at anyone in particular. We'll let anyone jump in and take that as they want to do it.
It's interesting for me. It didn't feel like a call from God. It felt like a strictly academic interest. I loved the brain. I was fascinated by human behavior, and I just wanted to learn everything that I could about that. And so that's what I pursued in school. I wasn't walking with the Lord at the time when I was a teenager and entering into college and was first making those decisions. And then it was after I had kind of said, this is what I'm interested in, this is what I'm doing, that I realized, oh wait, God can really use this. That this can be like being the hands and feet of Jesus, to mourn with those who mourn and to comfort those who are struggling, and to bring release from prisoners from addiction, and do all of these things that feel so meaningful, that I can do that in my field. So although it didn't initially feel like a call from God, it became one for my career to be given to God, to say, okay, God, you can use this. I give this to you. Please use it as you would wish.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else? How did your sense of call?
I have grown to appreciate and be grateful for the story I've told many times. When we have new employees for years in the hospital, and you talk about what brought you here, and I always share that as a young boy, I recalled watching my mother care for her mother towards the end of life, and knowing then that that was for me, right? And to see what that journey has been like, and over time, see the clarity in that, and then realize, looking back decades later, there was never really a question for me. And so it seemed easy, and for a while I was almost, I didn't want to admit that, because most people have a circuitous route, or they're challenged and don't have clarity, and for me it was, I am grateful for that experience. It was meant to be, and always was easy for me, and you can see and feel the emotion in that, because it feels real, like it was just recently. Yeah. And I have heard many things over the years in God's calling with my mom, and what she said during that time that I remember, and it helps keep me centered today through that work. So it's been easy for me in many ways. I knew early on that's what I was doing. In my teens and 20s, followed through that with her help as my first kind of mentor and coach through that. And it's been pretty linear in what it felt like this is always what I was supposed to do.
Wonderful. It's interesting how often we see someone else who's engaged in following God in a particular way, and that is what draws us in. We see the power of that and the impact of that.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Good. Anyone else?
I sort of thought, I might want to be a doctor, but it required a lot of focus. And in college, for a while, it wasn't that focused. I like a lot of things. I know that's an unfamiliar story for most, but I had to really decide I wanted to do it and to focus hard. And there was something about it, and I wasn't a person of faith at that time. I was in a 19 to 22-year-old fog, so. But when I was accepted, I was at ASU at the time, and one of the things I did, and we weren't going to church regularly, we did soon after that, was I went to the church on campus. The sanctuary was open, and just walked in and gave thanks. And now, in retrospect, I realized that God had a lot to do with me going. And he closed doors and he opened them, and there were many times where I'm sure he was standing there. There you go, I really believe that. And, so as I've grown in faith, I've come to recognize the activity that was actually there at the time. I think he was kind of waiting for me to get with the program or whatever. But
We're often catching up, aren't we?
Yeah.
It's a little bit ahead of us.
I'm always in catch-up mode with God.
Yeah, me too.
I would say, God has a plan. And similar to your story as well, I liked science a lot, and I was studying at undergrad, and I actually was a molecular biology major, and I was actually thinking about doing research and getting a PhD. And I remember one of my mentors in the department at the University of Pittsburgh said, "Oh, you're not a PhD type person." He goes, "You're meant to be a people person and a clinician." So I started thinking about it, and I started doing volunteering, and I was like, wow, this is a great fit. And I became a Christian my freshman year in college. That's when I really started accepting Jesus into my life. And I was like, this is a great field. I go, I can do science and be a scientist, be a clinician, and I can help people who are suffering. I'm like, sign me up. This is great.
Wonderful.
very similar story, that I always knew I liked people and animals, and I wanted to be a vet, and then I was like, oh, I want to be a doctor. And then I got to college, and yes, I love science too. And then I was like, well, I can do science and be with people. And I think it took years as I matured to figure out I truly am like serving people. And now, 20, 30 years into it, I realized this is a service job, and I'm here to serve people and care for people, and it's a big responsibility. And I'm very thankful that God led me down that path. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Speaking of God, have you seen God at work in your work? Or even more broadly, when you think about your faith, because you're all practicing your faith in particular ways, how does your faith make a difference for you on the job? How do you integrate your faith into the work that you're doing? And anyone that wants to jump in on that.
I can dive in for pause. I think faith is paramount to what I do. I'm a primary care doctor, and every morning before I go to work, I don't think there's a day that I've missed that I ask God to use me as a servant and heal the sick through me, and use the Holy Spirit for wisdom and knowledge and judgment. And sometimes I'm not going to heal anybody, but I might lift them up and give them hope. And I think there's a lot of hope in primary care and education that we provide. A lot of people have diagnoses and illnesses that they're really terrified of having. And sometimes you tell patients, you're going to live with this. This isn't a death sentence. This isn't anything awful. You're going to go about your life and do your thing. And sometimes I think just lifting people up and giving them hope, being honest, of course, is just a wonderful thing to do every day. So sometimes we don't do miraculous things and cures, but we educate people and give them hope and know that there's always hope in Christ.
Yeah, I love that. Hope conveyor.
I think, in addition to what Tony says, at least I found taking care of patients who were sick and complicated and suffering, that basically there were times when I didn't have everything I needed to help them. I wanted to help them, whether it was mentally or physically, a diagnosis or whatever it was. And I needed something else. And I would ask for help, and I got it. And it wasn't always, I didn't lay my hands on, I never laid my hands on, I would have liked to have laid and cured them, but none of that happened. And it was nothing, it was just that it worked better. Either they suffered less, maybe I did find a difficult diagnosis, but it wasn't anything that remarkable. Connected with them. I remember I remember one time I had to tell a patient he had lymphoma, and for some reason I was worried about going in to tell him that, and I actually don't know what it was. I don't know whether I thought I was going to be angry. It was a sort of a middle stage. It was the first time I said, I'm at the door, I need some help here. I forget what I even said, and it went really well. Went well enough. And so there were a lot of, when I had these really difficult patients, I would ask for help when I felt stumped. When I really wanted to help them and I didn't know how.
Yeah.
And I was helped. And I had some patients that were really complicated, usually mentally and physically, that I would pray for. Just because I needed that, I thought they needed it, and it helped me hang in there. Because after these sessions, I wasn't sure whether I was out. And it really did increase my faith, because one thing I really liked about the job was you really learn your limits, and you're confronted. You're maxed out. You lose all of your compassion, all of your brain, all of your humanity to do the job. And it's not enough by itself. And that has been a major thing to increase my faith.
Fascinating. It's we know that all of you get a lot of training. You have years of training and mentoring and develop this expertise, but actually the practice of your work is kind of humbling.
Yeah.
Because you kind of run to the limits of what you know or what you can do for people. Very powerful. Interesting. Anyone else want to address how you integrate faith and work?
For me, I would say that, I remember my mom giving me a little card to carry in my wallet with Proverbs 3, 4, 5 in it, and thinking about just always trust, and you'll get God's answers too. And I believe that my experiences in the first decade at the bedside has helped me now in the leadership role be able to ask different questions. And I don't always know what to do. And as my career progressed, I found that the frequency of when I'm not sure what to do has increased instead of decreased. I thought it would decrease, but then I get a bigger scope and responsibility. And
The more responsibility
instead
you
of
have, the less
instead of once a week not being sure, now it's every hour. It seems like, how do I fix this one?
Yeah.
But what I know now and understand with more clarity looking back, just through all our experiences in life, in our faith journey, look back going, okay, now I understand why I'm here. Or now I understand why we got to this place. And being able to trust and be centered in that way with my faith has afforded me the ability to go head to head with folks that are maybe looked at as being the expert in the business financial aspect, when that's what folks assume that I have, and didn't come through the clinical route until we talked through some details, and it helps
you're
us.
wrestling with some MBAs.
Some big time impressive folks that talk to folks at the New York Stock Exchange and others, right, that are brilliant, but keeping it centered back to what's the purpose and why we got into what we did, and why what are we doing, what's our mission, and what's the values of that. Helps me in a faith-based way ask different questions and be able to redirect back to things other than just the finances, which are incredibly important and very complex in healthcare. And they're always at a crossroads of what we want to do versus what we can afford to do. And so I think for me it is just when I don't know that, trust, be centered, and I ask the right questions, and the outcome comes when I'm not sure about those things. And I think that has afforded me the ability to be successful in that. But what I didn't realize throughout the last 20 years in that is that I think God was putting me in those situations to ask the different questions to keep the business centered on the people instead of maybe the business or financial aspects, and have it be a value-based blend towards what we want to get to, which all my colleagues know about those words keenly, and we're getting to that place in healthcare more and more. So I'm grateful for that, the experience, the journey, and it's made me, I think, more experienced, knowledgeable, and be able to go head to head even better with some of those challenging folks on a daily basis. So.
I used to think that the right thing to do was to keep my work and my faith separate, that was the ethical thing to do, that it somehow I would be being sneaky, or I would be crossing boundaries if I were to merge the two and incorporate them. And I feel like sometimes in the Christian world, we can have that mindset. I remember getting that question a lot when I was in school studying psychology. People would say, how can you be a psychologist and be a Christian? Or how can you blend those together? And now it's laughable to think about they merge so beautifully. It would be hard to imagine being a psychologist without having the Holy Spirit as my guide, without having the Lord as my anchor. And yet I did have that struggle for a while of am I allowed to do this? How can I merge these two together? And now it really is, I think it's such a beautiful thing. I feel like my work is the most effective ministry that I've ever done. I sit in my office and I have hurting people who are looking for hope and looking for clarity and direction, who just show up at my door and they come and sit in my office and they're saying, help me. And so a lot of times the people that I see are believers, and so we can really easily incorporate their faith directly into their treatment. We can pray in sessions, we can talk about scripture and use encouragements, and we can have these spiritual discussions. And I intentionally, I try to, I feel like the Christians that I see are more from word of mouth, but I intentionally don't have anything on my website or on profiles on different settings about being a Christian, because it feels like such a gift to be able to see people who don't know the Lord yet, and to get to be part of the process of getting them to start to be open to things. I've led a number of patients to the Lord in sessions, and that wasn't initially what I was trying to do with them. I'm trying to help them with their depression or with their anxiety or with whatever's going on. And sometimes things just go a spiritual direction as they're asking these big questions like, who am I and what's my purpose and is there hope for me? Or they're talking about their issues with their fathers and all sorts of things like that. It just really naturally lends itself to incorporating the spiritual in a way that's really satisfying.
Awesome. Wonderful.
Well, at the risk of talking too much, there is one really important set of experiences I had that I wanted to share, which I've shared in medical situations. And that is, many times when you really put your heart out to a patient and connect with them, there's almost an electrical, there's something that happens. It's almost electrical feeling. It feels, if I were to describe it, it is the peace that passes understanding. That sounds like as good a term as I could have. And I remember describing this in a couple professional meetings, so I try to explain that to the medical students, how when you get invested in patients and stuff, these moments happen. And the reason I bring it up to the audience is, I think that happens to Stephen ministers. I think that's available to all of us when we open our hearts to other people and connect with them, as we're so often encouraged to do in our faith, just because we're members of the kingdom or trying to be and doing that. And it's one of the great things that doctors get, that healthcare people get to do, but it's really available to everybody when you do that. And probably those moments are very profound. I still carry them in my heart, and it's magical. I don't know how to say it, but I wanted to share that because it was such an important part of what we do when we connect. And I see my colleagues nodding because they've had that too.
Yeah.
If I could just make a statement on that, and I agree 100%. It's interesting, I think as a Christian, you kind of put that out there and you attract Christian patients. And sometimes the biggest compliment that happens to me is I'll have a patient that'll say, "You're Christian, aren't you?" They'll say that to me.
Yeah.
And I won't, maybe I use the word blessed, or I use certain words maybe they picked up on, don't know. But it's interesting because you think of Matthew, when 2 or 3 are present, are gathered, I am present. And I think that's what we're experiencing. I really do believe that.
Yeah.
That as Christians who are there to be helped and we're there to heal, and we're both Christians believing in Jesus, that amazing things happen like that.
Yeah.
Thank you. I want to just take us up to a bigger topic that's one I'm sure everyone in our audience, digital and live, think about, and that is, if you were in charge of the American healthcare system, you were the czar or czarina, and you could change 1 or 2 things. What are the things you think about the American healthcare system currently that break God's heart? What are the things that need to be changed? I know that's a big one.
Yeah, it is a big
I think I gave it on my list, though, so
Yeah,
you're
you
not
did.
totally unprepared.
I think
These are
there's
the answers
oh,
you're
I'm
supposed
sorry.
to know, right?
Everyone's
I know
looking
a lot.
in the middle.
I can talk for an hour on this one.
That's all right.
I was going to say that there's, healthcare disparities and inequities. I think that breaks God's heart. I think the time crunch that's put on us by management to see our patients, because we don't get to spend as much time with our patients as we really should. I think that breaks God's heart too.
Yeah, one of the things that came out in some of the earlier discussion is that healthcare it's a virtue-led practice that you were trained in. It involves research. It involves care and compassion and treatment, and it's also a business. Mm-hmm. And this is a level of complications. And you're saying sometimes,
Yeah.
it sounds like it breaks your heart a little bit that you don't get to
Yes.
spend more time with patients sometimes.
I know Tony's looking at me because he's thinking,
Yeah.
you shouldn't be complaining, because at Mayo has a different structure with our practice. We
more
do get
time,
a
yeah.
longer amount of time with our patients,
Yeah.
but it's still not enough.
Yeah.
I need
Yeah, it's
more.
true.
Plus your practice is, her practice is incredibly complex.
That's
So
true.
any neurologist, and then especially a neurologist like hers is, so,
Yeah.
yeah,
Plus the amount of records you have to review and look
That's
at
true.
too.
yeah.
Well, it's interesting. So we have 3 pillars we look at in healthcare, the triple aim, right? Access to care, quality care, and affordability. Those are kind of the things we look at. There's actually a quad aim, which is provider wellness, which is real too, especially
Yeah.
after the pandemic with all the people that got burnt out with the pandemic that were healthcare providers. But it's interesting, you look at kind of those 3 measures that we look at. Do we have equal access to care? No, we don't. Is healthcare affordable? No. I mean, I have seniors, especially where I'm at in Glendale, that they live off their Social Security and they decide whether they're going to get this medicine or not. That's real, And then quality of care too, a lot depends on what healthcare system you're in and how much time you have allotted. So I think that, those are some disparities. If you break down those parameters that we see that we're always trying to improve. I mean, I think people with the best of intentions in the world of management and healthcare are always trying to improve that, and I think it's getting better, but it's definitely disparities that are real, and I think that's a problem.
That's a helpful grid to see.
Yeah, disparities of healthcare is the first thing, of course, that comes to mind for all of us that live in the healthcare space, because it's a national, top priority in every setting. And, we look at that. If you look globally across the country, someone that lives in this zip code versus that zip code in the same city are going to get very different healthcare. And that's not, I don't think, what God would ever want for us. And so there's a ton of work that everything from churches, organizations, nonprofit, and healthcare systems do to try to bridge those gaps in however you can define it based on site and location around the country. But, backing up from that, I think the other thing that, at least from my perspective, that I live every day and think about what would Jesus do in this situation, very different than how we make decisions, because we make decisions for things, whether it's triple aim and value-based or not, in the reality of our world today in healthcare here in the U.S., and it is not by any means one of the best models in the world. There are some phenomenal things about our model, from discovery, research, and quality, and innovation and technology and advancement in medical science and knowledge, but it comes at an expense, and we have sort of grown in a way of complexity in healthcare that from big pharma and legislation and overregulation and other things that impact our reality, that it is so expensive and just not affordable for what we'd like to be able to deliver evenly everywhere in all sites and locations and places and demographics. And so I think the complexity of that, I had the right decisions at the right time over history, over decades, but it has gotten to the place that sometimes doing the right thing feels like you can't, or it's not in your control. And I think it's the definition of looking for the positive, or where do we have options, and who can we partner and engage with as Christians in other ways, and other entities and churches and organizations to bridge all of those gaps and the disparities that we do have, because the model that we have is a national model, complex, and is going to take a long time to change, but we are changing it. We're bringing value and other things to the table that did not exist as a national driver 10 and 20 years ago.
We have come out of, we're going to provide some time in just a few minutes for questions. And that, you see that microphone there. If you've got a question, we're going to ask you if you've been thinking of a question. How many of you have been thinking of a question? I just want to see some hands. I know some of you have definitely been thinking of questions. We're going to do that in a second. But I wanted to, myself, having gone through the pandemic and sort of been forced to become a little bit of a healthcare thinker during that pandemic, because you're responsible for the healthcare of your congregation. You're trying to figure out, safe practices, and you're listening to public authorities. And I wonder, now that we're not out of the pandemic completely, but we're in a different location, looking back, what are some of the lessons that we learned as a country in the process of that? So if there's another similar crisis in the future, how would you go about dealing with it differently than we did? I know there's a mental health part to that too. Yeah.
Well, now we all know how to use Zoom, so we can, so that's helpful, right? If this happens again, we can all, we've already learned how to do that, how to have medical appointments and therapy appointments on the computer.
Yeah.
That's one hurdle.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, concrete lesson.
Well, this is not a solution, but I really think that there needs to be a healthcare spokesperson who's relating the scientific information out to the public. Because one of the things when I listened to the doctors speak, they made sense to me, and then I talked to somebody else, and they were upset about it or angry. And I think part of the problem with COVID was you really had to respond right then. And so you're talking about the pros and the cons of the vaccine or the shutting down. Well, and normally when it's measles, that's been going on for centuries. So you don't have to offer your opinion until you're ready, or polio, or all these other terrible things. So you could, all that discussion about, well, you think we should open up, I think that all happens and we hash it out with the data, and then we go out with a message. Instead, you get these crazy messages which just added to the complexity. So I think number one would be a healthcare spokesperson. And number two would be to mine all the data from this and find out which measures works, whether the isolation does or not, or when, because people were having to make decisions. I think they were trying to make the best decisions they could, but without really information. So then you go by, well, I think this is going to work because you asked me,
Yeah.
and so I'm going to do that. And now we'll know which strategies had more pain and suffering than benefits. So I think that's what we really need to mine it and be as objective as we can and take the politics out.
Yeah, my comments are similar to that, aligned with sort of my experience the last couple of years. You know, we looked around the country, both at the federal level, but then state and regional level, for who are the community spokesperson and the trusted advisors that understand science and fact, but also understand what we don't know and can be looked on by communities as being a voice of expert to help folks in the community filter out the noise of all those things that were occurring. And you know, we are the state's largest employer, and we knew we had a place. We have 50% of the healthcare market, and we knew we had to step up and do that, and we did it in a lot of different ways. But our chief physician was out publicly, frequently, being that voice and trying to establish it. But I will tell you, behind the scenes, she and others took a lot of very big hits because of it. And so I think the lesson is still doing what you need to do, but that leadership matters, and science needs to be at the center of that. And somehow using this in the lessons learned for local, state, federal agencies to have planned who is speaking where and when and how, and pray that God helps our elected leaders use them in the right way. And then, you know, help each other look for who are those trusted leaders in your communities and nationally that you can look to for fact and not fiction.
I know that the pandemic put a lot of stress on health providers' unique mental health issues that folks had. I remember you saying at one point that you were losing about 40% of your nurses each year. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. Just remarkable stress that the whole system was under. Yeah. I'd like to open it up now for questions from the group. We don't want to have just the questions that are on my little sheet. So does anyone want to ask any questions of our panel? Yeah, jump right into that mic so you can come onto the live stream, Mike. This is Mike Bergfeld.
Okay. So I've seen at the hospitals when I've been there, there's like a little church downstairs in some of them. I'm not sure, there's probably a name for that. I'm curious if there's any pressure within your organizations or your associations to get away from that, or to make it more agnostic, or if you're totally free to talk about Christ in your environment like that. I'm stoked that I always see the church down there, and I hope that's something that will stay. If you could maybe talk on where your industry is leaning in that direction.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've worked for Catholic, Methodist, for-profit, nonprofit healthcare systems, so different ones that come through faith-based and that aren't. And consistently, pretty much every place has some type of a place they typically call a chapel, respite center, unless it is associated with a specific faith in that healthcare system. Most of them are non-denominational, and I've seen many that have symbols of all faiths in them, right? So as healthcare providers and systems, and most all of us come up through the reality that we are here for everyone at all time, regardless of their background. And so I think our willingness to accept the gift to be invited in people's lives when they need us, and the calling to do that over decades also filters into things like that, like the chapel or the space. And we have chaplains of all faith, and a lot of, pretty much all healthcare systems do that in different ways based on the system and, who they are and what their core belief is. I think part of that also then is our own faith calling and our comfort level of figuring out where, when, and how we can put that into the workplace. And because of all those folks that we care for every day, some of them need it more than others, are ready more than others, and it is, back to trusting God and helping direct when and how do we do that, from, praying with somebody and you just know and they ask, or you can figure out that's what they want, to just being accepting of someone, and that's what they need right then in that space. So I think a lot of it comes through our art side of our science that we develop over years, and that's an equal importance than the science from what we've come through.
Anyone else want to respond?
Wait, well, yes, I mean, the good news is, unlike in the secular world, the hospital world is dealing with real stuff and issues that are beyond, like I said, human resources. And the hospital administrators are delighted to have the help of chaplains. There are many, and of every faith, and there are in the medical literature, not in a religious medical journal, just a standard talking about the importance of the spiritual history and of knowing where somebody is in their faith, and of seeing that as an important thing for their healing. So in the world where you're really wrestling with the stuff and not just pontificating on the outside and whatever, when you're out, you want every man on the team or woman, and I can tell you that the chaplains of all the faiths are very amazing, and they're there, and the people that go to chaplaincy, they have a calling to help, and don't you think? I mean, I've seen nodding. They are so good, and they're part of the team, and they support the healers and the patients. They're great. You guys agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, so the hospital's a safe place for faith.
Mm-hmm.
It's and I could just say, as a pastor coming into the hospital systems, you are well received and welcomed, and given access and encouraged to be there, which is wonderful. Ann Trouter.
Oh, hi. I'm curious, from an economic standpoint, that's what I really like to think. What is happening? You said the nurses went down 40% each year, but just as far as your staff, the nurses, in general, people working, does that seem like they're still not coming back to work, or they're still, or is it starting to get better in the healthcare industry? I'd like to know.
Yeah, these are big, broad generalizations in some ways, and it depends, right? It depends on how big and where and what site, but when you look, overall in healthcare, state and nationally, pretty consistent evidence around the country that between 40 and 60, depending on where in the country, you're looking at between 40 and 60% of the nurses that worked in hospitals during the pandemic have left the profession. Not have left the hospital, have left the profession. So we are having a massive number of needs and influx of new graduate nurses. And we see this cyclical over healthcare over time, not pandemic related, but over time there's a huge shortage. Everyone goes into nursing, and then there's an excess, and then they change professions. But right now, I would say of all the challenges in the last 2 years, we're in absolutely the most challenging, and in some ways it feels worse spot of the last 2 years. The great resignation and that it's impacted all industries is real, but we're recovering and we're building and we're seeing some positive signs, and it feels like we have hope and a plan, and it's improving. But the challenges in dealing with all the things we've talked about and the impact to the moral injury that's happened in the last 2 years is real. And I really have faith and belief that God will work within those lives, and they will return when they're ready to, and maybe return in a different way, in a supportive way, in insurance or another industry or education or another role, but they will return. But we have struggled with that in a significant way, much more so since really between August of last year, September, when the last surge picked up and then sustained through February. March, April, May saw the worst exodus we've ever seen. And so there have been times where we have had to bring in 3,500 nurses paid at almost crisis strike agency rates, which would be rates close to what a physician would make from outside of the state of Arizona, just to try to get by week. And as an organization, we had an unbudgeted, unplanned additional $800 million in expense for nursing care last year. So we have never been in as big of a financial hurt as we are today. We're big, successful, we will recover, but we're also comparing ourselves to others in the country, and the top 10, 20 or so that have had, even in nonprofit healthcare, profit margins of 7, 8, 9%. Most all of them are negative right now, bottom line. So it will take a while to recover. And that kind of adds into the stress of wanting to have high quality, high service, deal with the inflationary issues and recover. And then on the tails of all the moral injury pieces and things that we deal with, and helping them feel excited, inspired, fulfilled in the purpose-driven work that we do every day. It's a lot of effort right now around that and that space. And so I think, praying for what you can pray for, it's all about that, that folks are inspired about the purposeful work that we do and that they need to do, and to return to that and to be healed from the last couple of years, because I think all of our people in society need that. And we're seeing it return. But it's pretty tough right now.
Thank you. Michael.
Hey, so you all have done an amazing job of explaining. So if the center is the interaction between a healthcare professional and a patient, you all have done an amazing job of explaining how you start where you are and navigating your way towards that interaction with the patient, how your faith plays into that. What would you say, I guess it's almost like, you got any hacks, any light? Coming from the other side, because I know, even for like myself, there's a lot of people that are in situations where it's not just my healthcare, it's also my kids, and I'm also parenting up now and dealing with healthcare situations for my parents and things like that. So again, in the context of faith, what would you say, or almost advice you would give? And I know that's a huge thing because the healthcare is just a colossal system, but you're coming from this side. What would you say to those who have a faith worldview coming from the other end? How do you, navigating going towards that interaction, or how to contextualize, or how to think about, or?
The administrator sitting back and letting my physician colleagues comment on this one.
I have a couple thoughts, because we've actually, so Mike, let me ask you, so you're talking about just bringing your faith to this interaction, or putting it?
You've talked about how your faith informs how
Yeah.
you do what you do.
Yeah,
But as a patient, or just as someone who is operating in a system, everyone's going to need healthcare.
Yeah.
And as a person of faith, then, coming from the other side of the equation, as it were, how would you how do we have our faith inform us as we're going into this system that, is in need of this or that, or, just with the intricacies, I guess, and the complexity of the healthcare system as it exists in our nation?
Okay, I have a three-part answer. So today, I would say, besides prayer, I would approach it because what I'm hearing in there. But anyway, so you get in there, you may not get the information you want, you're concerned, you're worried, all these things that make it hard, either being a patient or patient rep is kind of what I'm hearing the questions about. Not when it goes well and you like the diagnosis and you like the provider. But the thing about it is, if you approach the things that at first you wonder what's going on with curiosity and not judgment, and just ask questions, curious questions, you may get the information you want. So that's something you can do today, and get the best from wherever you are. And then if that doesn't work, talking to somebody in the healthcare field, even somebody at church or somebody to just try to get a different perspective. That's what you can do today. Now, can I put in a plug for the Health and Wellness Committee?
You can.
Okay. So we're talking about some educational interventions or programs we might put on for the congregation. And it sounds like maybe there might be interest in this. So we were thinking about something about how to get the most out of your healthcare encounter, was it? And so we're developing that. We don't have it scheduled, but that would be our intent. So it sounds like that would be useful for people. But that won't be for 6 months probably, because the reason is our schedule's booked, we got blood drives and bike rides, so we're busy. Yeah, but anyway.
That's wonderful. Now, Lisa, did you have a question? I saw you raise your hand.
Oh, they answered it in the course of other things.
Good. Yeah, right here.
Hi, I am wondering, as many seniors are sitting here in the room, how the healthcare system is trying to advance to protect and help seniors in the continuity of care, along with the ability to feel as though the senior is not getting passed by, or like you were saying, Doctor, the fact that you don't get enough time to be with your patients, and seniors like to have a little more time than whatever they're allowed. And the fact that we have such a burgeoning number of seniors that live in this valley. And so how do you see the continuity of care coming about, palliative care, and again, people that are able to disseminate information to the senior world about how to use their healthcare system. It's not a hard thing to do, but it's hard to do when people don't know how to do it or where to go to get that information.
Yeah, thank you.
I can answer a little bit of that question. So we have a practice model of high-touch continuity, because we don't want to see you when you're critically ill or you've waited a long time. We want to maintain wellness as opposed to, hey, you come in when you're really sick. So one of the things I would recommend to all seniors, period, is that you always get an annual wellness visit. That's a once a year covered by Medicare. Check the boxes, dot the I's, cross the T's on all your preventative care, and make sure that all your prevention's up to date. And then, at a minimum, have a 6-month follow-up visit where you are seen in 6 months, just to have a look at everything, maybe review your labs, order some updated labs. If you have certain diagnoses, we know for sure, if you have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, if you have diabetes, if you have any heart issues, particularly congestive heart failure, you should be seen every quarter, every 90 days. We call it a Q90 visit. And there's a lot of data and there's a lot of good information that shows that if we keep that high touch, high continuity with you, we can actually give you quality care, and we can make sure that we're staying on top of your wellness rather than having an emergency and you come in and I haven't seen you in a year or a year and a half. So that's my best advice for senior citizens out there that are on Medicare, to make sure that you're scheduling those visits and acting upon it.
Great.
Can I just add to that? Because
Yes.
that is crucial. I mean, I do specialty care. I see senior citizens because our elderly patients who have primarily Parkinson's disease. And so I tell all my patients the best thing to have is a great primary care doctor, because that's who you need to be seeing regularly, who then will refer you out to the specialist when you need to be seen by a specialist. And yes, I think you had more, there was more to your question that we can maybe answer later if we have to wrap up, about what the country is doing to help seniors. Yeah.
This has been wonderful. Let's give our panel a round of applause. Thank you. Very good. Thank you. And let's take a minute to pray for them, and then we'll close, and that will allow perhaps some informal interaction around questions. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for these wonderful folks who've dedicated their time and their energy and their heart and their compassion and their abilities to the healing ministry that you are doing in the world. And so we thank you for Tony, we thank you for Shelley and Lamont, and for David and for Erica, and ask your richest blessing on them. Give them insight and focus and energy and good colleagues, and let them sense your spirit as they work and as they pray with folks and as they offer your healing. And make us, too, agents of your healing in our relationships. We heard that call tonight as well. We pray this in your Son's great name, and all God's people said,
Amen.
Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks. That was fun. Thank you.
Thank you.